Welcome and thank you for joining us for this webinar presentation. We are the Homeland Defense and Security Information Analysis Center, or HDIAC, one of 3 IAC domains in the DoD Information Analysis Centers operating under the Defense Technical Information Center, DTIC, within the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Our informative webinar series highlights current and emerging research and technology developments. It presents an opportunity for accelerating the DoD's leverage of these advancements by increasing awareness and fostering technical collaboration. HDIAC serves as one of the premier information research partners and curators of technology advancements and trends for the Homeland Defense and Security community. As such, our organization supports those working in the Homeland Defense and Security domain of DoD research and engineering. We do so by helping navigate the vast landscape of scientific and technical information, allowing our customers to get a head start on their technical projects. With an understanding of the Homeland Defense and Security DoD research and engineering landscape, we provide research and analysis services. We help unlock access to information, knowledge, and best practices from government, industry, and academia to stimulate innovation, foster collaboration, and eliminate redundancy. We hope you enjoy this webinar presentation and that it serves as a catalyst for community collaboration and improved DoD Homeland Defense and Security research.
Can everybody hear me now? Okay, great. Okay, sorry about that. So let me go ahead and get my screens reshared here. Apologize for that little bit of a delay. But one of the things is, my name's John Clements, and I'm the technical lead for the Homeland Defense and Security Information Analysis Center, or HDIAC. And I also am going to be presenting today's webinar, and this is going to be based on an exercise that we ran back in February with a small group of folks. It was not open to the public like some of our trainings are, but it was a great exercise and test case to see that we could pull off this kind of exercise and make it worthwhile. So we're going to host another one open to our community in October. So I wanted to go over with you folks what we did, what came out of it, and what we're going to do moving forward. And it is on managing public health during a migration crisis. Just a couple of admin notes before I get truly started. In the bottom right-hand corner of your screen should be a little three-dot ellipses menu, and in there should be the Q&A portion of the webinar. You can go in there, drop your questions in at the end of the webinar. I'll get to them, and I will do my best to answer them. And if you need a copy of the slides, they are uploaded onto the HDIAC website. You can go to hdiac.org/webinars, find today's presentation, and you'll be able to download it. And lastly, just a reminder, our publicly available webinars are recorded and uploaded to YouTube. So if you have to cut out early, or if somebody you know missed it, you'll be able to catch the recording on YouTube. So with that, I will go ahead and jump right into it. So essentially, the exercise took place on February 20th to 22nd this year, and we provided a tabletop exercise with some subject matter expert briefings, kind of mixed in so that there wasn't 8 hours of just classroom time before it kicked off. So we tried to mix them in to keep students engaged. And they were all in a residence program at the Naval Aerospace Medical Institute. The scenario focused on a migrant crisis in a fictional area. So if you've done any DoD exercises, sometimes they use these fictional maps that you can find on what's called the Decisive Action Training Environment, something that TRADOC puts out, U.S. Army TRADOC puts out. We use the Caucasus region. So if you've ever worked a place and you were in virtually in Atropia and Lemuria, that's the region we decided to use as a surrogate. And we just postulated something where a conflict in that area led to migrants coalescing in some camps and unable really to leave those camps. So why is HDIAC interested in this issue at all, though? And being a DoD-funded organization, what role did we play in humanitarian assistance and when it comes to a migrant crisis? And that said, it's a humanitarian and a security issue. This chart shows how many people have been displaced worldwide year over year. And as of 2022, there was over 100 million people displaced. This does bring about some important discriminators between different terms for people, but ultimately, when it comes to the public health needs of these people, they're roughly the same. But in the green, you'll see it's IDPs, which is internally displaced persons. And that is somebody essentially who has fled their home for one reason or another, whether it be a natural disaster or violence, military action, something like that. But they have not crossed international borders. So that is most of the folks that need this kind of help. And then you have the dark blue and light blue are related. They're refugees, with the dark blue being under the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees mandate. And then the light blue is a separate mandate. UNRWA is essentially focused on Palestine. So there's a few different areas there, the West Bank, Gaza, but also Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. Refugees in those areas fall under UNRWA's mandate. And then you have asylum seekers and a newer grouping or newer definition of people is other people in need of international protection. So people who maybe don't meet the exact criteria to be a refugee or to be an internally displaced person, but they still are recognized as needing international protection and help. And again, when you combine all of those together, you're looking over 100, almost 110 million people worldwide. And it impacts everywhere. So these, the bubbles on these map, the bigger the bubble, the more people, and this is where refugees go. So not necessarily where they're coming from but where they're moving to. Each country that is labeled is one of the top 5 of their respective groups. So you see in Europe and Africa, you're seeing more people who are considered refugees. And then in South America, especially, you see folks that represent the other people in need of international protection. And you can follow history a little bit and figure out why certain people end up in certain places. Germany had a history in recent times of more open borders for Syrian refugees, for people crossing the Mediterranean, often ended up in Germany. And then, of course, with recent events in Europe, more and more people are fleeing to countries like Germany. Of course, Turkey with the Syrian civil war, many Syrians have fled to Turkey, as well as Iraq with the history with the Islamic State, and also even U.S. operations there. You can understand why people end up where they are. And then you even look at a country of Uganda, it's a little larger than I think people realize. It's about the size of South Dakota, but it's not a massively large country. And to be taking on the number of refugees that it has is something is pretty. It strains their resources quite quickly. So we wanted to set up a scenario which would require these folks that we were training, which were all military physicians, ranged in rank from 03. They were all Navy, so 03 lieutenants up to 05 commanders, with one 06 captain who was kind of their class leader. And so we try to pick a scenario that maybe would involve their support. I will say up front that there is a little bit of white carding, kind of hand waving of things here. Somebody that is looking at this closely would probably say, well, I don't know that the U.S. would get involved in this, or not in this way. So please just suspend some disbelief here. But we wanted to create a scenario in which multiple ethnic groups, multiple people of different genders, age categories, and religious backgrounds would come together in these camps to really work through the problems that they would face. So we took the good old Atropia map of the Caucasus area, and this is sort of the more of the pre situation before anything erupts. So they have significant ethnic minorities. Again, this is all things that we just kind of created on the fly. So the map has the basics of Danovia being in the northeast, Gorgas being in the northwest, Lemuria, a small country to the west, and Ariana to the south. And so those colored kind of bubbles or lines mark where those different ethnic groups are kind of centrally located within the country of Atropia. So mostly along the borders that they share, but there's a little more to it than that. And then the little explosion things are showing areas where there was flare-ups of violence, and then the stars with the 1, 2, 3, and 4 is the future locations of the camps. So you have two major regional powers, Danovia in the northeast border. They are the countries infusing cash to neighbors. They are primarily Christian, but the minority that lives in Atropia is primarily Muslim. So that creates a little bit of, ethnically we're similar to the folks across the border, but religiously we don't necessarily fall in line with them. So there's tension right there off the bat, a little bit. And Ariana to the southern border, and you could guess what countries these people are sort of similar to, but they have a regional influence, but usually focus on the larger neighbors, so don't necessarily influence Atropia as much. They are majority Muslim, and there's Ariana minorities in the southern Caspian region of Atropia. And then the other border states, Lemuria out to the west, they have a small minority in Atropia that is mostly Christian, but is also a very tight-knit community. They're very suspicious of outsiders. So that leads to difficulties as things are transgressed. And then Gorgas in the northwest, that ethnicity tends to live up there near two large freshwater lakes. So the Gorgas government kind of encroaches on some of the water and mineral rights up in that area. They're mostly Eastern Orthodox Christian, but the minority who live in Ethiopia are a mixture of different forms of Christianity for the most part. So out in the West, Georgia separatists, with their support, with government support, kind of began attacking some of the infrastructure, occupying police stations, border checkpoints. So you had these well-equipped fighters who lacked formal training, but there are many of in their leadership corps are war veterans. So although the fighters on the ground don't necessarily have spectacular training, they are kind of knit together with a core of war, people who have some military training and experience. So that leads to a formidable force, but with poor discipline, which is leading to unpredictability. So the Ethiopian government is really struggling with these folks that are coming across the border or that are internal. And then the Lemurian insurgency in the West, very small but irregular and violent against the Ethiopians. So Ethiopians that live in that area are fleeing, but then also some Lemurians who don't want any parts of the violence, they're fleeing, and again, they're primarily Christian. In the east, you have the Denovians, mainly thievery, raiding, the stealing crops, livestock, vehicles. It's probably a mixture of ethnic Denovians and ethnic Ethiopians. It's really hard to be sure because they're in a more mountainous region, so it's harder to really gauge large movements and what's going on. And then the Arianans to the south, they're just kind of taking advantage of the chaos. They tend to be a wealthier group inside of Ethiopia, and criminal elements are preying on fleeing people. They're offering fake jobs or offering money for illicit services, such as arms smuggling and human trafficking. So you can see, as this thing is beginning to develop, there are a lot of people taking advantage of the chaos and creating more chaos, and then it eventually erupts into a full-scale emergency. So there was a little bit of a regional response to that as violence erupted more. Gorgas and Denovia sent in peacekeepers who were supposed to be protecting the minorities in the regions. Naturally seen as an act of aggression by Ethiopia and some other governments, but the Ethiopian government was really unable to mount a response to it because of how much has been going on. So ethnic Ethiopians tend to depart those areas more hurriedly, as well as Muslim Denovians who are fearing reprisals from the primarily Christian Denovian troops who are entering the area. So they begin to flee as well. And then the criminal activity swells even more. You have some of the people fleeing are resorting to some crime to help feed their families. The old ethics debate on, do I steal bread to feed my family? Criminal organizations continue to take advantage of people and trafficking for labor and human trafficking. And a big problem is that people are posing as aid workers to offer jobs or food, which then is leading to a large distrust of legitimate relief organizations. Because as word starts to spread that so-and-so went and to take a job with this relief society and ended up, basically providing slave labor for escaping, then that word starts to spread. So it just makes the relief effort that much harder. So in response, you have a ton of people heading towards the Caspian coast. Near Baku, the capital, people begin to stop the fleeing families because they don't want to, the city and its resources be overwhelmed. So they start with two camps. The largest camp is near Baku, and the smaller camp, which they were hoping that the larger camp would be mostly the ethnic Ethiopians, and the smaller camp would be others. But that's never realized. It becomes just a mixture. And there's two other small camps out west. They're similar size to each other, and they both have completely different demographic makeups. So Ethiopia requests UN help for this humanitarian crisis. So internationally, the U.S. agrees to support under a UN mandate. And this is where I need people to kind of suspend some disbelief, because there's going to be a lot of people that may say, well, the U.S. would do this, or this is how this would work. That's part of the reason why I created this in a fictional area. Was we're just going to assume something was overwhelmed by events, and we set in military medical personnel. And again, that was for the purposes of that previous exercise, because we were training military folks. So the U.S. comes in, they're asked to support the eastern camps, which is camps 3 and 4 on the map, which are near Baku, and they're only going to provide medical and logistical support. And the only security that the U.S. is going to provide is for their own forces. So other nations offer support: Turkey, Norway, the Netherlands, and Italy, but they go out to camps 1 and 2. And they'll provide medical, logistics, and some demining support around the country. And then there are a lot of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, already operating in the area, but there's very little coordination of efforts. So when I say current conditions, this exercise took place in February, and we were kind of postulating that they were going to arrive in this area at the current time in February. So what was the situation on the ground? Well, we purposefully gave them kind of scant information. So there's the 4 camps listed here. Camps 3 and 4 are the ones that the U.S. is going to go to. Camp 3 had a much larger population of 21,000, fairly even splits between male and female. And then the age range, you have a good amount under 18, a little less than that, 18 to 64, and then only a handful that are above 65. And one big gap in this information, and this was done purposely, is there's a big difference between a 17-year-old and a 6-month-old baby. And that's not displayed here. And that was, we specifically, as we went through the exercise, we wanted people to say, hey, we need this information, and we need to know these facts. So if you're being sent into an area and you're supposed to be managing the public health, seeing that there's 11,560 people under the age of 18 isn't that helpful. And so that is one of the things we wanted to get to. And then we also had a listing of how much water was available per day. And those listings for potable and non-potable water are kind of stretching the limit. It is enough water to support, but it is also one of those things where if you're coming in and you're trying to manage the public health, another 100 migrants show up to the camp, and suddenly your water resources are stretched almost to the breaking point. And did that sort of on purpose to have the students think about, like, okay, I have enough water now, but what happens in a week from now if water deliveries aren't able to come in? So we wanted them to be thinking about that. And then the other thing, and we didn't get into this too much, but we discussed the amount of electricity in the camps. So Camp 3, the bigger camp, we said for now it's got 100% electrical power, some grid with some diesel generators. But again, we want people in the public health realm to sort of look at that and say, okay, well, with all this unrest, is the grid power stable, or is it better to be on diesel generators? And then you see the number of hospital beds in each camp, and this was a big part of our scenario too, where there's very minimal hospital beds. Obviously, we're looking at people that might be working more in a clinic type setting, doing outpatient things. But one of the things that we brought up that played a role in our later scenario is that Camp 3, which is the biggest of the U.S.-led camps, is the only one with any maternity care equipment and personnel, though there is no maternity care or labor and delivery beds or rooms. So again, just trying to bring up that thought. And what we said in the scenario is that now other camps, a woman shows up, she's 7 or 8 months pregnant, and they just get her to Camp 3, and there's supposed to be coordination, but as part of the scenario, we kind of said, hey, there's supposed to be coordination of this, but there's really not, because it's just so chaotic. So the medical personnel at Camp 2 They get somebody who's either high risk pregnancy or late term, and they want to send her to Camp 3, and they put her on the next available mode of transportation and get her out of there. And then you have something showing up with a pregnant woman on board, and you had very little clue that was happening. So we worked in some group exercises on those kinds of scenarios. So the U.S. forces, they're currently arriving, which was late February when we hosted the exercise. Camps 3 and 4, they're accessible through Baku, but some infrastructure is damaged, but it's fairly reliable that you can get things in and out of there. Camps 1 and 2 are more difficult to access, and the airfields that are there are primarily compacted dirt, and they're a little more remote. So what this leads to is a lot of the NGOs are targeting camps 1 and 2 for aid because they feel like, oh, they're more remote, so they're going to need water and they're going to need medical supplies. So because you're less remote, you're actually getting less help. And there's very little coordination of the aid. And that's a common problem throughout all different IDP and refugee camps, is the lack of, or the difficulty in coordinating among these multiple agencies. So the weather right now, it's kind of cool, and it dips to near freezing overnight. So the morning thaw tends to lead to muddier roads and footpaths and bogged down vehicles. It's kind of like the Rasputitsa, if you've ever heard of that in Eastern Europe, and in the fall and the spring, turning roads to mud. And out west, it's freezing at night at the western two camps, hitting 50 degrees at the hottest point of the day. So again, there's a little bit of a thaw. So the temperatures aren't unbearable, but there is that freezing thaw that is making things a little murky. Rebels and criminals and troops from the outside nations, they don't want to have a confrontation with the American troops. So they are still targeting civilians for violence, for theft, for human trafficking. So it's a little bit of a permissive environment, or semi-permissive environment for U.S. forces. But the refugees I should say the IDPs, they're stuck. They're stuck where they're at. And then that is also not to say that somebody isn't going to steal something from an American truck if they think they have an opportunity, if they think it's not being watched. So you need to be careful. And then we threw out some assumptions. One was that U.S. and allied forces can move relatively freely throughout the country on official business, but they're not authorized to travel outside of very specific areas for anything other than official government business. So they're kind of also stuck to the camps mostly. Evacuation is not a viable option. There's just too many people. There's not enough infrastructure to get them out, and a lot of people don't want to leave. There are some diseases in the camp, but none have reached outbreak status yet. But testing is limited, so you can say, yeah, there's a lot of people with symptoms over in this section of the camp, but I don't think it's an outbreak. But you can't test everybody, so you're not 100% sure. So that's something we wanted the students to be thinking about walking into this. As can be expected in any refugee or displaced person scenario, people are showing up, they're lacking proper nutrition, they haven't been drinking adequate water, they haven't had adequate shelter, and they're exhausted and possibly traumatized for being uprooted from their home, things that they may have suffered along the way with criminal activity and violence, and just the journey itself. That leads to everybody that's coming into the camp needs some sort of care from the get-go. We did say that medical supplies and equipment, for the most part, must be provided by U.S. and allied supply chains. The host nation supply chain is very weak, so you're relying on your own supply chain, what you can provide, as well as some of the NGOs. And then lastly, English, not widespread, but most people can read and write in their native language. So our two primary references that we went over, there's a lot more information out there on managing these types of migrant camps. The two primary ones that we focus on is the Sphere Handbook and the UNHCR, UN High Commissioner for Refugees WASH manual. WASH being water, sanitation, and hygiene. The Sphere Handbook is an internationally agreed upon framework for providing humanitarian assistance, and it is mentioned in DoD publications, including JP 3-29 on foreign humanitarian assistance. And it provides standards, key actions, and key indicators. One of the things to just, if you're going through this book, one of the things to realize is that, or to be cautious about, is that a lot of the key indicators are, some will have actual percentages or standards, such as the amount of water people need in a day, the amount, things like that. But some of them don't. Some of them just say your key indicator is how many people have access to, just for an example, bedding, comfortable bedding, let's say. But it doesn't tell you what that standard should be. So it is some of the things you have to come up with. Say, okay, well, what is an acceptable standard for this? And I think a lot of that would happen as organizations descend on a camp, figuring out where the baseline is and perhaps increasing that percentage over time. So, by March, we want to be at 30%. By May, we want to be at 65%, something like that. So it includes sections on water supply, sanitation, and hygiene, mainly WASH, food security and nutrition, shelter and settlement, and then health, with all four of those playing a massive role in public health, as it were. The website there is where you can go and get the handbook. Just a word of warning from my computer, hooked to my corporate network, I couldn't get to that website. But I could get to it from my personal computer. So if that website doesn't work, maybe try something that's not hooked to like a government network or something like that. And then the UNHCR WASH manual goes through all of anything you can imagine regarding water, sanitation, hygiene, the protection principles, coming up with strategies and operational plans, sector coordination, assessments, monitoring, reporting, and it has a lot of agreed upon standards on how to monitor people have access to WASH, and that it's being used, and that it's safe and clean. And so, and some ways of, if you're not able to test the water everywhere or survey every home, ways you could do that are internationally recognized, to be able to help guide through that. So some of the major themes that we touched on throughout the exercise, throughout all phases of our discussion, WASH was pretty much number one. Water, sanitation, hygiene, it's just so important. It's really the first thing you need to worry about when you get to a sort of displaced persons type of event. Then the next one is women's health, and that is probably maybe tied for number one in a lot of these camps. So in a lot of areas that suffer this kind of situation, especially the areas of current day, women have a much different role in society than we're used to here in the West, and in the United States. And it is much more difficult to get in and see what women actually need, because there are certain things they cannot talk about with a man, or certain things that they're just susceptible to. And then, of course, you have, if a woman becomes pregnant, or, most of the human trafficking is going to be focused on women and children. So that became a massive focus of what we were discussing during this. Obviously, the sexual and reproductive health for both men and women. Disease vectors, very important to anybody who's been around the public health sector for any amount of time. As far as disease vectors being things like mosquitoes, but we can't forget that in a lot of areas of the world, you may have dogs that are roaming kind of wild and other animals that might be bringing things like rabies or carry fleas. So it's not just mosquitoes and things like that. Um, do public health assessments, which would be very tricky if for U.S. forces that are operating in many areas around the world. So we more discuss that through the lens of how would you gather an assessment on public health working through people like translators, people from the host nation, and ensuring that you're getting good data on that. Of course, that also factors into NGO and host nation interaction. So those are the people that are going to probably be running the show, and you have to interact with them and use their capabilities to the best of your ability. Obviously, cultural sensitivities, and then the management of children and other special populations, the elderly, people with certain diseases, pregnant women, things like that. Now, one of the things we did is we did just a quick study. It was pretty informally managed, but uh, I liked the layout of it, and then kind of found out throughout my time working on this um, that this is kind of seen as a pretty good standard. But this is the Al Zatari refugee camp, which is located in Jordan. That's housing Syrian refugees. I believe it's housing about uh, 80,000, but I could be wildly off on that number. And I do apologize because I'm sure that none of that is readable. But one of the things we did is we just laid out this map and let the students kind of look at it and see what is there and how it's set up. And you can see the different churches, the medical facility, schools. There's actually a Korean Taekwondo academy in this Al Zatari camp. So we sort of discussed that, like, well, why is that there? And, obviously, kids need a place to go, and maybe even adults need a place to go to exercise and maybe learn some discipline and things. All the different water facilities are listed here, including ones that are out of commission, ones that are damaged. And an important takeaway on that was that somebody's tracking that these water or wash facilities, I should say, are damaged. And so that's important to them, and they're tracking it and they're labeling on the map. So even though there was a fair number of damaged ones, it was apparent that they were tracking it. So that was interesting. So if you're interested in a refugee camp, there's a lot of information you can find on a website called Relief Web, which is run by UNHCR, on the Al Zatari refugee camp. And it's pretty phenomenal. A lot of the programs that they've run there, and then how they follow up with those programs to see if they're working for people. It's really eye-opening. So to get into the actual exercise, and I realize we've been talking a lot about this exercise, and we're really not into the 4 phases of it. But this is actually going to be kind of a quicker part of it, because a lot of what I discussed kind of transcended through all 4 phases. But so phase 1 was, and these are phases that I came up with. These are not doctrinal phases. So I just want to be upfront with that. But they do roughly follow doctrinal phases of operations. So phase 1, orientation, was really just getting there, getting on the ground, figuring out who's who. Phase 2 is operations and austere conditions. So it really was focused on, all right, your resources are stretched thin, but you have certain things going on you need to deal with. How do you do that? Phase 3, the normalization. So now our resources are starting to stabilize. Things are starting to get a little more normal, but we do still have to manage the camp. So we're going to continue to monitor people, focusing on improving the quality of life. But don't forget, this is a temperate climate. Seasons are going to change, so you're going to get into very hot summers where you may need more water. And you want to improve your facilities, both your personal facilities, the medical clinic, as well as those around the camp. And then phase 4, repatriation, we really glided through this because that is specifically called out in military doctrine that it is not necessarily something the U.S. military will take part in. But we want to touch base on it because that is the goal, right? Is to get everybody back to where back home. And so we just discussed like what do you need to be thinking about as far as like maybe an outbound medical screening, the safety, family unification if somebody's being sent somewhere but their rest of their family was somewhere else, like keeping an eye on that and just the tracking of them and just so in that case we just kind of really briefly discuss these areas because it's not necessarily a military core competency. So during the orientation, so one of the things we decided was that the information that we showed on the earlier slide with the numbers of people in the camp, those are accurate numbers, but that is also pretty much all the information you're given with just a limited amount of other information you may give during any type of country in briefing. But so once you get on the ground, some of the first things that you're worried about, obviously this is a public health course, so we want to know what the public health situation is. What diseases are present in the camp? I bolded vectors because that seems to be the biggest one that we want to worry about. Are there mosquitoes present? Flies? Vectors are led to sources of waste. So how is so that's the other bolded area. How's human waste, medical waste, solid waste? How's that all being handled? Is that all getting taken off site or far enough away where any vectors that are attracted to it can't contaminate the human population? Obviously, we're worried about the electrical supply and the nutrition of the people in the camp. So that's some of the basics that we're worried about, and we discussed how we go about learning all that. Supplies and resupply. So discuss just prioritizing what you need versus nice to haves, things you absolutely need to have, and then how you get that from the host nation and the NGOs and learning those processes. Living conditions, both for the residents, the camp residents, and your own personnel. So there's an occupational health type of angle to all of this. So you can't just get there and get going. You have to make sure your own personnel are safe, or else they can't help the camp residents. So we discussed, what methods of getting an idea of the lay of the land of the safety in the camp. The availability and abilities of host nation personnel, including the medical personnel, interpreters, sanitation workers, construction workers, things like that. One of the things we discussed with the interpreters is their medical knowledge and their knowledge of colloquialisms and idioms and things like that, where there may be some misinterpretations because even somebody that speaks the language relatively fluently may not know all of the medical terms for things. So we discussed just kind of being careful with how you handle those situations. Obviously, liaison with civil and camp authorities. Anytime that the U.S. military responds to this, they're not going to be in charge. They're going to be in the back seat. So they're going to have to become integrated with the civil authorities, the camp authorities, as well as the NGOs and other host nation personnel outside of the camps. And they're going to need to learn who to speak with their concerns. Since it's not a military-run camp, they can't just go up and say, we need to do this. The commander says, yeah, it's a great idea, let's do it, and it happens. But obviously during the orientation stage, they're going to be kind of busy. So, and there's nothing to say that the folks inside the camp want the United States to be there. So there might be a little bit of a frosty reception from some, at least. Others may be very happy to have the help. But that may just be a little bit of a mistrust, and so we discussed kind of working through that and not taking things like that personally. NGOs obviously are very important to this, but some may fear being associated with the U.S. mission. but they may also need logistical and security support. But finding any common ground in this kind of scenario and any chance for a symbiotic relationship is very important. And then everybody's favorite thing, contracting, figuring out how you're going to get your supplies and what channels that has to go through is going to be immensely important, as well as, whose job is it to clean the latrines, and whose job is it to cook the food, or are the people cooking food at home, and things like that. And then going into the operations, phase 2, operations in austere condition. The cultural sensitivities from the standpoint of a U.S. response to many areas in the world, this is going to be the most important single factor, is how we handle things culturally. So it cannot be overstated that this is incredibly important, especially when you're dealing with people's medical needs. There's a lot of sensitivities in different areas that we just don't think about in the same way in the West. As far as making sure that there's acceptable levels of food and shelter, we discussed the WASH manual, the Sphere handbook. Triage, and by that I don't mean triaging individual patients, but who can we help and who needs to kind of wait. But the corollary to that is, how do we communicate that to the population and keep trust? So somebody who maybe just has a cough and a fever, if it's not over a certain temperature, we just want you to stay home, hydrate, and whatnot. And don't come into the clinic because you just we don't have the things we need to help you. Well, how do you communicate that in a way that doesn't say, we can't help you? You need to try to communicate certain things in a way to keep the population informed, but also keep their trust. Patient movement, we didn't discuss it as much in this exercise just because of the fact that we said that the patients or the refugees are kind of stuck where they are. But that's not to say that there isn't a chance to maybe evacuate somebody to Baku or something like that. So try to figure out, where can we move patients? Is it safe to move them? If we send somebody by a roadway ambulance, can they pass on the road? Do they have that expertise? And then, of course, maintaining consumables. So we figured out who to speak to in phase 1. Now we need to create a method of maintaining those. Whether we may not have our own military systems that we normally use, it may be something that's being put up on a whiteboard in an NGO's office somewhere. So we have to figure out how best to keep on top of that, and when to order things, how long it's going to take. And that's not a small task. And then phase 3 and 4, we really condensed down quite a bit, but the normalization, repatriation phases, again, just getting to a normal, more reasonable quality of life, monitoring the public health situation continually, coming up with ways of maybe, every so often we're going to do this, or we're going to check that these areas, these low-lying areas aren't holding water to allow mosquitoes to breed or something like that. And then obviously, like I said before, the seasons are going to change, and that could create its own issues. Animals will migrate, mosquitoes might come out more, and other things like that. And I kind of already busted open repatriation, but just kind of thinking ahead to that, when these people are ready to return home, or if any return home while we're there, how is that going to look, and what is the public health relationship in that scenario? So all that to say, that was a lot of discussion and it took a lot of time, but we are going to host another event, and it's going to be open to the HDIAC community, and that is going to be October 8th to the 10th, 2024. It's going to be held in Belcamp, Maryland, which is just outside of Aberdeen Proving Ground, only a little ways north of Baltimore, Maryland. And we're going to center this more so around kind of group activities and solutions to problems in that way. So it won't be just sitting there getting a death by PowerPoint and then having a light discussion. We're actually going to create more scenarios instead of just having the one, and different groups are going to take a different angle at the various scenarios. So we're looking to, I'm sorry, registration is open. There's the website there. So you probably can't click it on the screen, but if you go to hdiac.org/events, you'll be able to find it down with in the October area. And yeah, so we're capped at about 80 people because of the facility that we're in. So it's going to be small enough that I think everybody will be able to learn from each other, but big enough that there will be enough knowledge passed around. And we have a few public health type of SMEs already, ready to go to help facilitate things. So now we're just looking for attendees, people that are interested in learning. It is free to anybody that wants to join. But then that also means like lunch is not provided. Hotel accommodations are kind of on your own, but the event itself is free. And it is in person because of the type of event. It's going to be very, very collaborative. So I'm ready to discuss and have opinions and learn something. And then that's me at the top. I'm the technical lead, and I'll be facilitating. So if you have questions about it or suggestions, you can reach me. There's my email address there, john.clements@hdiac.org. My primary SME for public health is Mr. Gregory Nichols, and he's there at greg.nichols@orau.org. Again, I know you can't click these links, but there is the link to the Sphere Standards Handbook and the UNHCR WASH Manual. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. So I do apologize, but I wanted this, but to be able to see the Q&A in the chat, I will be, I need to stop sharing, unfortunately. So one person did ask, will the event be conducted virtually or just in person? It is just in person for this event. We do not have a virtual option. And then somebody mentioned I can post this in the chat room, and that is a great idea. Just give me 1 second here, and I'll go ahead and do that. And then scroll through. So one person asked, do these manuals cover what kind of precautions these NGO workers need to take based on the type of location they are assigned to? Those two manuals do not. So that is a shortcoming of them. Security is definitely of paramount concern going into these areas. I do know that there are things on the UNHCR website to discuss personnel security for NGOs that are responding. And also, I believe, though I could be wrong, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, they have information as well. They also have one thing that I did not put up in the presentation, kind of an engineering guide to camps, to setting up camps. That's very detailed. Gives you great ideas of exactly how far away, latrine pit should be from a food preparation site and from water. Some of that is in the Sphere manual, but it's much more detailed in the Doctors Without Borders publication. Let me see if there's any other questions. I don't see any other questions right now. But with that, again, like I said, I welcome everybody to come to the October event if you have an interest in this or pass the information along. I did put the links to the handbooks as well as to the October public health event in the chat, so you can grab it there. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. Again, it's john.clements at HDIAC.org. I just attempted to put in the chat, it didn't go. 1 second. But I thank you all very much for attending the webinar, and I look forward to seeing some of you in October. Thank you.